Okay, The Man Who Would Be King. Let's look at the main script structures. So the start, you could say that it starts as kind of once upon a time there was this ragged man comes to tell his story, which is, of course, the older, wiser, broken, lost Peachy Carnan speaking to Kipling. At the end of the first 10 minutes, we have Peachy back in his younger days, though it's only 3 years ago, though it feels like longer. I think he says 3 years and 1,000 summers ago or something. So he talks about how the time feels like an eternity, though it's only 3 years. So at the end of the first 10 minutes, he meets Kipling on the train, and they establish the Masonic connection, which will play out throughout the piece. What would be the inciting incident in this thing? Well, you could argue that it's the breaking away from the army. They're out of the army. Are they going to go back home? Or are they going to stay and become kings? So it's the failed mentor again. So basically they're up for a discipline punishment. And that becomes like, I suppose, the inciting incident for them to say, no, we're going to choose a different fate. And off they go. They set off on their mission, which in perhaps a more modern film, they would have that at the end of the 30 minutes. So, which I assumed they would set off at the end of 30 minutes. So seeing that they set off at the end of 10, it was interesting to see what would be the Act 1 30-minute point. Okay, so I'm going to stick to Act 1 being 30 minutes, Act 2 Part 1 being 30, Act 2 Part 2 being 30, and Act 3 being 30. The plot point then at the end of Act 1 is actually not that they set off, because they've already set off, but that they leave the convoy of people they're travelling with to go it alone. So they break away. So you've seen them break away from the British Army. You see them then break away from the convoy, these things that would perhaps look after them and keep themselves safe, they break away from, which is why it's such a great adventure, because it is that call as a man to be your own man, but one has to be careful. So Act 2 Part 1 begins with them crossing the snowy mountains, etc. So the halfway point there, the bridge one or the pinch one, is the arrival in Kafiristan. So they arrive at the destination. The halfway point is the moment when the arrow goes into Danny and he doesn't die and is thus conferred with godlike qualities. In Act 2 Part 2, the bridge 2 or the pinch 2, the halfway point in Act 2 Part 2, is Danny falling for Roxanne. Now both men have made a pledge not to get involved with women because they're on a mission to get money. That's what they want. They want riches, they want jewels. So Danny betrays that. Plot point 2, often known as the moment of truth, is that Danny is made king and so becomes deluded. He loses himself. And that's the beginning of the downfall, really. That it didn't take much for this, you could say, arrogant man who suffers from hubris, as they both do, to lose himself, which again, symptom of empire. It's interesting to look at a lot of American films are to do with hubris unpunished because they've still got the empire. So that's what's going on in a lot of those films. You can see Tom Cruise always plays the unpunished egotist, and people like Christian Bale often try and do the same thing. And, you know, all the big stars do that in Hollywood. Okay, so Act 3. Well, the climax is clear. It's Act 3 builds up to his wedding to Roxanne. She bites him. So the wedding, the bite, the blood, he is exposed, the fight, and the death. So the guys are chased out of town, killed. The end is that, surprisingly, Peachy survived. And he has Danny's head that he's kept with him. But he's lost himself. So it's they failed to become rich because of their hubris, their arrogance, their egotism. Danny failed to come out with the money because of his honour and loyalty to his friend. Which again, it's a great story because we admire that, but also we know where it led him. But then you could say, in the end, they did get the success they wanted, and that they did become kings, gods, albeit for a moment.